Story 1. I remember the way my grandfather used to tell stories when I was a kid. He had this way of sitting on his wooden stool, leaning back just enough to make you worry he'd fall, and spinning these tales that stuck in your head like a bad dream. Most of them were just old Hmong legends or ghost stories, but there was one that still gives me chills when I think about it. So, back in the old days, before electricity and paved roads, there was this tiny village tucked deep in the mountains. Life was simple. People farmed, hunted, and shared what little they had. But at night, when the lanterns were lit, the village had this heavy silence, like even the crickets didn't dare make noise. My grandfather said it was because of the rat monster. Now, the rat monster isn't just any spirit. It's not like the playful little ones that knock on your door or hide your shoes. No, this one was serious. They said it came at night, walking silently through the village, looking for someone to take. It didn't matter if you were young, old, strong or weak. If it wanted you, it would take you. People swore they heard its footsteps sometimes, slow and heavy, but when they opened their doors, nothing was there. One year, during the rainy season, strange things started happening. Chickens would go missing, then a pig. People would find their pens wide open like someone or something had let them out. Then, one night, a young girl disappeared. Her family searched everywhere, but it was like she had vanished into thin air. That's when the elders decided it was time to do something. They gathered the whole village in the meeting hall, which was just this big wooden hut with a thatched roof. The shaman, an old man with a white beard that almost reached his chest, said the rat monster was angry. He claimed someone had broken a taboo. Maybe they had eaten in the middle of the forest, or stepped into the wrong clearing, or disrespected the spirits. The shaman said the only way to protect the village was to perform a ceremony. He told everyone to stay in their homes for 3 nights and not to make a sound, no matter what they heard outside. If you hear footsteps, he said, don't open the door, don't even breathe too loudly, just wait until dawn. Now, there was this young man named Leng. Leng was about my age at the time, maybe a little older. He was one of those guys who always thought he was smarter than everyone else. He laughed at the shaman's warning and told his friends it was just an old man's way of scaring people. Leng even said he'd go out during the first night, just to prove nothing would happen. The first night came, and the village was dead silent. People locked their doors and covered all the gaps in their house with cloths, just in case. The air felt thick, like you could almost touch the fear hanging over everyone. Around midnight, Leng's friends dared him to go outside. He grabbed a torch, laughing, and stepped into the dark. His friends watched from the window as Leng walked down the main path, his torch swinging. At first, nothing happened. He called out, teasing the rat monster, saying, "Come on, where are you? Are you scared of me?" But then he stopped. They said he stood there, frozen, staring at something in the shadows. The torch's light flickered, and for a second they thought they saw something standing there, something tall and thin with long arms and eyes that glowed like fireflies. Leng screamed. His friends slammed the door shut and didn't dare look outside again. The next morning, when the sun finally rose, they opened their door and found Leng lying in the middle of the path. He was alive, but barely. His hair had turned completely white, and his eyes looked like they had seen something no human was meant to see. He couldn't speak, just kept mumbling words nobody understood. After that, the shaman knew he couldn't wait anymore. He gathered the village elders and told them he would fight the rat monster himself. "This spirit has taken too much from us," he said. "It's time we take back our village." The third night, the shaman prepared himself. He set up an altar at the edge of the village and lit incense, chanting words in the old language that no one dared repeat. The villagers stayed hidden in their homes, but they couldn't help peeking through cracks in their walls to see what would happen. At midnight it came. The air grew cold, and a deep, growling sound echoed through the village. Out of the darkness, the rat monster appeared. It was massive, taller than any tree, with limbs that stretched unnaturally long and eyes that burned like coals. The shaman stood his ground, clutching his ceremonial sword and a pouch of herbs. The fight was brutal. The rat monster moved like smoke, disappearing and reappearing in different spots, its claws swiping at the shaman. But the old man was quick. He threw the herbs into the air, creating a barrier that the spirit couldn't cross. Then he struck at it with his sword, chanting louder and louder. The villagers said they could hear the battle from their homes, the clash of claws against metal, the shaman's voice rising over the howling wind, and the ear-piercing screams of the rat monster. At one point, the ground shook so violently that people thought the whole village would collapse. Finally, just before dawn, there was silence. When the villagers came out, they found the shaman sitting on the ground, his sword broken and his robes torn. But he was alive. The rat monster was gone. The shaman looked up at the sky, his face pale but calm, and said, "It's over." After that night, the village was never troubled by the rat monster again. The shaman became a legend, and people would tell his story for generations. My grandfather always ended it the same way. Courage and wisdom will always win, but never forget, it comes at a cost. And you know what? I've never seen a spirit like the rat monster myself, but if I ever did, I hope I'd have even a fraction of the shaman's courage. Story 2. Back in the old days, my grandfather used to tell us stories late at night. Most of them were funny or about his youth, but there was one story he told only once, and I swear it's the kind of thing you can't forget, even if you try. It was about something that happened when he was a young man living in a small village deep in the mountains. So this was before modern roads and all that, when villages were spread far apart and you had to walk miles to get anywhere. My grandfather said the village was surrounded by thick jungle with trails weaving in and out of the trees. These paths were quiet during the day, but at night, people avoided them. Everyone knew the stories about spirits lurking there, but nobody liked to talk about it. One night, my grandfather and his cousin were returning from another village. They'd been at a small celebration and lost track of time. By the time they started heading back, it was already getting dark. His cousin, Chow, joked about how they should hurry before the spirits got them. My grandfather laughed it off, but deep down he admitted he was a little uneasy. The jungle at night was different. The trees seemed closer together, and the usual sounds, birds, insects, leaves, seemed quieter. They walked fast, their footsteps crunching against the dirt path. Chow kept talking, making dumb jokes to pass the time, but my grandfather barely replied. Then, out of nowhere, they heard a sound. It was faint at first, like a soft humming or singing coming from somewhere in the distance. They stopped and listened. The sound wasn't human. It was too melodic, too strange. It seemed to float through the trees, getting louder and softer, like it was moving. Chow said, "It's probably just the wind," but his voice wavered. My grandfather nodded, though he wasn't convinced. They kept walking, picking up the pace. The singing didn't stop, though. It stayed with them, growing louder, like whatever was making it was getting closer. Finally, Chow stopped and turned around, holding up the small torch they'd brought. "Let's see who's messing with us," he said, though it was clear he wasn't feeling brave anymore. My grandfather didn't want to look back, but he didn't want to leave Chow alone either. So he turned. At first, there was nothing. Just the jungle and shadows cast by the torchlight. But then, between the trees, they saw it. A woman dressed in white, standing completely still. Her long black hair covered her face, and she was just standing there, not moving, not making a sound. Chow whispered, "Who's there?" But the woman didn't answer. My grandfather said it was the most unnatural thing he'd ever seen. She didn't breathe or shift her weight, just stood there like a statue. Then, slowly, she raised her hand and pointed at them. That was enough for Chow. He held onto the torch with all his might and bolted, yelling at my grandfather to run. My grandfather didn't hesitate. He ran after Chow, their footsteps pounding against the trail. Behind them, the singing started again, louder this time, almost like it was following them. They ran and ran until they reached the edge of the village. When they finally stopped, they were gasping for air, hearts pounding. They looked back, expecting to see the woman, but there was nothing. Just the dark jungle. The villagers noticed something was wrong right away. They asked what happened, but neither my grandfather nor Chow could explain. They just kept saying, "We saw her, the woman in white." The elder of the village, an old shaman, listened quietly and then told them not to go back to that trail for a while. For days, my grandfather felt uneasy, like something was watching him. At night, he'd hear faint singing outside his hut, but every time he looked, there was nothing there. Chow started avoiding him, saying he didn't want to talk about what happened. Then one night it got worse. My grandfather woke up to a strange feeling, like the air in his room was gone. He looked around, and there, standing in the corner of the room, was the woman in white. Her face was still hidden by her hair, but he could feel her eyes on him. She didn't move, didn't make a sound, just stood there, staring. He froze, too scared to move. Then slowly she lifted her hand and pointed at him, just like she had on the trail. That's when he heard it clear as day, her singing. It wasn't loud, but it was close, like it was coming from inside his head. My grandfather didn't know what to do. He tried to scream, but his voice wouldn't come out. The woman stepped closer, her feet not even touching the ground. He closed his eyes, praying for it to stop, and suddenly it was morning. He told the shaman what happened, and the elder nodded, like he'd heard this kind of thing before. The shaman said the woman was a restless spirit, someone who had died tragically and couldn't move on. He warned my grandfather not to respond to her or acknowledge her, no matter what. For weeks, my grandfather avoided going out at night. He kept a small charm the shaman gave him and prayed every evening. The singing stopped and he started to feel normal again. But then one day, Chow came to him looking pale and terrified. Chow said he'd seen her again, this time outside his house. She wasn't just standing still, though. She was pacing, circling his home, her hair dragging across the ground. He said she was humming a lullaby, but it sounded wrong, like the notes were twisted. My grandfather told him to talk to the shaman, but Chow refused. He said he didn't want to make it worse by drawing attention to it. That was the last real conversation they had. A few days later, Chow went missing. The villagers searched everywhere but found no sign of him. Some said he'd run away, too scared to face the spirit again. Others whispered that the woman in white had taken him, dragging him into the jungle where no one could find him. My grandfather never saw her again after that. He moved to a new village and started a family, but he never forgot what happened. He always told us to respect the spirits and to never walk the jungle trails at night. I don't know if the story is true, but when he told it, the look in his eyes made me believe him. It was like he was reliving every moment, every fear. And honestly, I don't think I want to find out if it's real. That's it for now. I hope you enjoy this story. If you did, check out more of my videos on the screen above or visit my channel for even more. Don't forget to subscribe for future videos. Stay safe and take care.